this morning. Now, hundreds of hand-painted ceramic flowers will be unveiled in Epsom this coming Tuesday in a poignant event to mark World Mental Health Day. The flowers, which will be on display in the grounds of the former Horton Chapel, now an arts centre, represents the thousands of patients who lived and died at what was the Epsom cluster of psychiatric hospitals, the largest concentration of such hospitals in Europe. The event marks the culmination of a year-long project by the Friends of Horton Cemetery, where members of the public have painted flowers in workshops while discussing mental health and disability, and research continues to help discover more about the stories and the lives of the patients, many of whom would have otherwise been forgotten. And joining me now is Lionel Blackman, the founder and director of the Friends of Horton Cemetery. Now, good morning to you, Lionel. Now, before we talk about what's happening on Tuesday, for those not familiar with this area, tell me more about Epsom and its role in the psychiatric treatment of so many thousands of people back in the last couple of centuries.
Well, from the late 19th century through to the late 1980s, early 1990s, Epsom was the home of 5 large psychiatric hospitals that principally served South and East London. When they were built, it was thought the country air would be conducive to improving the health of the patients, including those that suffered from epilepsy, that were housed in a hospital known as St Ebers, and it was then known as an epileptic colony. So yes, it became the largest cluster of psychiatric hospitals in Europe, and for those that died there, and many did of TB, that frequently they suffered outbreaks in the hospitals, who had families too poor to receive the bodies for burial, they had to find ground in which to put them in paupers' graves, effectively, sometimes marked with a tombstone, but usually marked simply with an iron cross with a number. And that was Horton Cemetery, a 5-acre site it became eventually by the purchase of additional land, and a total of about 9,000 patients were buried there between 1899 and 1955. The health service continued to maintain the cemetery beautifully up until 1983, when the hospitals began to be sold for development into housing estates. And this cemetery, that was actually isolated, it wasn't adjacent to any actual hospital grounds, was just sold off as a single item to a property speculator in 1983, who has sat on it ever since and neglected it, removed the tombstones. So we're trying to reverse that historic wrong, bringing attention to the fascinating lives of the many people that were buried there. We've so far published 372 stories, and more are in the waiting line for approval and publication. Absolutely fascinating stories. We've got those of some notoriety, a Totty Fay, who was a notorious petty criminal that was constantly in the London newspaper headlines, Byron Pedley, who was a music hall star comedian in the Victorian age, George Pelham, who survived the Titanic sinking and later another sinking of a ship in the Second World War, Felix Garcia, the muse of Diaghilev, the ballet impresario, and so forth. Absolutely fascinating stories, but also the ordinary stories hold attention. The people who had tragic lives, born into poverty, living in workhouses, full of stress, ending up in the hospitals and now in forgotten and abandoned graves. So yes, the culmination of our work so far is on Tuesday the 10th of October, starting in a field next to Horton Cemetery, where we'll have poetry, song, speeches, and then a march led by a Scots piper to the former Horton Chapel, where we will unveil the memorial garden of the ceramic flowers, Nikki, you mentioned just earlier.
Yes, well, it sounds like a really nice way to remember, these people that have been forgotten and didn't maybe get the send-off that they deserve, because things were very different back then, weren't they, when these asylums were operating? I can imagine, a lot of people would be treated very differently today, wouldn't they?
Well, this is one of our motivations. As society understands and tolerates mental conditions with greater sympathy and empathy in today's age, treating it in the same way as a physical condition. It can be temporary. It needs to have that understanding. If we can demonstrate respect for those who have died whilst in psychiatric care, that is highly symbolic to the tolerance we can show to those today that are living with such conditions. And I can give you an example of how, even in the 3 years that we've been in existence, our charity, more and more relatives of those who are buried in that cemetery are coming forward as the stigma is being removed.
Oh, and you mentioned these wonderful flowers. So what do they look like? Can you give us an idea, and how many have you got?
Well, I'd like to say first that the project's being supported by King's College. The history consultant of our charity, Dr. Alana Harris, has been pivotal to the success of this project, and it's also been funded by Historic England. So yes, school children, retirees, teachers, other members of the community across Epsom and Ewell and in other places have been painting these ceramic flowers that you might say they're kind of like different shapes, but imagine a poppy shape, and then with different colours, people paint them as they wish. As they think about one of the patients buried in the cemetery, they're given a card with a photograph, and we have many photographs of those buried there, and a little narrative as to their lives. Those painting the ceramic flowers think about that life as they paint. So they're in many, many different shapes, sizes and colours and patterns, a real kaleidoscope of all the hundreds of people that have been contributing to the project. And I believe we have something in the order of 1,500 of these ceramic flowers.
Wow. Oh gosh, and how long will they be on display for?
That will be unveiled on Tuesday.
And how long will they be there for?
So they'll be at the Horton Arts Centre for 3 months, and then in due course we hope to replant them in the grounds remaining of the health service facilities in one of the former hospitals at St Ebba's off Hook Road in Epsom.
Oh, it's going to be quite spectacular. And can anybody come down and take a look and take pictures?
Absolutely. The more people that come, and particularly come to Hook Road Arena car park from 12:15 on Tuesday and make their way to the field next to Horton Cemetery in Epsom, that will have a significant impact in our campaign to have the cemetery restored to the community, because effectively that public demonstration will be a message to property speculators that it's highly, highly unlikely that a planning permission for its development will ever be granted. So for more details, it's important that your listeners go to www.hortoncemetery.org, and that's Horton as in the elephant, Horton.
Oh, thank you. And is this where we can read about the stories that you've researched so far as well?
Yes, all the stories that we've published so far, the 372 are there. And even today, 3 years on into this project, when I read one of the new stories that have been written by one of our 50 wonderful researchers, I get a chill in my spine, knowing the reality of that life and that body being buried in that cemetery.
Oh,
it's thrilling, really thrilling.
Yeah, well done for all of the work that you've done. I mean, it sounds, just incredible stories have come out, and let's hope we have learnt a few things since those
Thank you very
times
much.
as well. Lovely to chat to you today. That was Lionel Blackman, who is from the Friends of Horton Cemetery. And yep, you've heard those flowers are going on display from Tuesday, and it sounds like it will be a beautiful spectacle and a very fitting tribute as well. Right, let's have Westlife and World of Our Road still to come. We've got our teenage DJ, and we are going to be chatting foraging for autumn.